Today I'm going to tell the story and of course test drive one of the cutest and most beloved old-timey cars from Soviet Union. The official factory designation for this car is ZAZ-965, but most people know it by the name Zaporozets, or even more so by its nickname Gorbaty, and for a few years it was exported to Europe by the name Yalta. The history of this car started in Moscow in mid-1950s. By that time, Soviet Union has cured most of the wounds of the war and got back to developing its national economy. For 10 years, between 1946 and 1956, the only model in the segment of small cars was Moskvich 401, which was almost a copy of the pre-war model Opel Kadett K38. In 1956, it was replaced by quite bigger and quite more expensive model Moskvich 402 and later Moskvich 407. So the Ministry of the Automotive Industry decided to design the new small car to be cheaper and easier in production compared to the new Moskvich models. Not only more affordable, new car was assumed to be, but also suitable for disabled people, war veterans. There were a lot of them, and they desperately need some decent mean of transportation as an alternative to small and primitive cycle cars. Already in 1957, at the Moskvich factory, the first prototypes of the future car have been assembled. To find best engineering solutions, few most popular European subcompact cars were taken as examples. These were BMW Isetta, Citroën Chevaux, Volkswagen Beetle and Fiat 600. In the end, it was decided that Fiat 600 is the best among others to be considered as the main example. However, few disadvantages in its design were pointed out. First of all, Fiat suspension was too weak for the heavy-duty conditions of the Soviet roads. The front suspension with a single transverse spring was substituted by a torsion suspension. It was more lightweight and moreover allowed to spare some space in the front of the car. Fiat engine also wasn't considered a good one, in particular with respect to future modernizations and modifications with larger and smaller displacements. There were also problems with antifreeze liquids in the USSR in the period, so mainly air-cooled engines were considered for the new car. At least 6 types of engines were tested on prototypes, including 4- and 2-cylinder boxers. In 1958, one of the prototypes was exposed at the World Exhibition in Brussels, and a year later in Moscow. Moskvich factory hadn't enough production powers to start assembling new cars, so in 1959 all documentation had been transferred to Zaporozhye in Ukraine, where a new automobile plant was being built. That's how eventually the car was called ZAZ-965, which is abbreviation for Zaporozhsky Автомобильный Завод. Engineers in Zaporozhye made several further changes to the car, and in 1960 the massive production started. The car we are driving today is from 1969, the last but 1 year of production.
Most of the people in Russia and in former Soviet Union know this car by its nickname Gorbaty, which means humpy, which it received due to its distinctive hump at the back of the car. Many call it Gorbaty Zaporozets to distinguish this, the very first car of the factory, from the subsequent Zaporozets models, which were not humpy. So the body of this car was obviously inspired by Fiat 600. The reason for that was the easiness of production of this body. It actually required much less welding operations and much less hand labor to produce this body compared to the typical cars in 1950s, 1960s. To be fair, this car is very far of being a copy of Fiat 600. It has different dimensions, it has different suspension, it has bigger wheels, which you cannot just take and put inside the Fiat 600 body. And moreover, it has a totally different engine. So here is the motor compartment of the car, and I dare say this engine is one of the most interesting parts of this car. It features one of the rarest form factors for the car engines. It's a air-cooled V4. The reason to put such kind of motor in this car are quite obvious. It's very lightweight, it's very compact, it's very easy to maintain, and it's very easy to repair, which was an important stuff for the Soviet people of the period, because most of the owners of this car actually do all the maintenance procedures and all the repairs by themselves. If you take off all the stuff from the engine, like starter, generator, and whatnot, it weighs about 80 kilograms, so two strong men can easily pull this out, do a complete rebuild, and put it back.
There was even a cartoon where father and son repaired this car inside their apartment, and this is not a bit of a humor there. Aluminum magnesium crankcase, iron cylinders, aluminum cylinder heads, all of this sounds quite progressive for the beginning of 1960s. Cylinders are easily detachable, so as I said, repairing this engine is easy. Camshaft is located between cylinders in the V of engine and push valves using iron push rods. A V4 has a distinctive sound which is quite different from other types of engines, so let's take a minute and listen to it. Early cars had a 750cc engine with an output of 23 horsepower. It was considered not quite enough, so after 2 years in production, the engine was expanded to 900cc with an output of 27 to 30 horsepower. These V4 air-cooled engines were actually in production for 35 years until mid-90s, and the biggest one was 1.2 liters with an output of 45 horsepower. The top speed is somewhere between 85 and 90 kilometers per hour, which seems not a lot. However, the acceleration is okay up to 50-60 kilometers per hour, which I think more important for a city car than a top speed.
Inside it's quite a spacey car, taking in mind how small it is outside. So it's quite enough space for 4 adult people. Of course, better for short trips, because the rear seat there is it's quite close to the front seat. Quite often, owners of this car removed this front passenger seat to have more space here for some stuff or for the rear passenger.
A lot of these cars were produced in special versions with handling for disabled people. For example, for people without 2 legs on this photo, or for people without 1 leg and 1 arm. These cars were actually given for free to disabled people and war veterans. Speaking of luggage, the trunk is small and it already contains fuel tank, spare tire and battery. In the remaining space, the owners of this car usually carried some instruments or some spare parts, so no space actually for some personal belongings. So the only place you can put your bags to is the roof of the car. The most common problem reported by the owners was that this car overheats badly. I think this is quite exaggerated, since most of the times engine overheated due to problems in ignition or carburation, or simply because it was dirty and didn't give out heat properly. On this car, however, to completely exclude any chances of overheat, the special spacer was put between engine and the crankcase to increase the oil capacity from 3.5 to 5.5 liters. So this one doesn't overheat even at 100 degrees Fahrenheit and in heavy traffic jams. What's really good in this car is its suspension. The travels are huge, especially in the rear one, and its softness make it feel like it's a much bigger car. Surprisingly enough, it has quite good off-road capabilities. The clearance is 175 millimeters and rear wheels are constantly loaded with the weight of the engine. So people actually quite often use this car off-road. On the other hand, due to oblique levers in the rear suspension, Zaporozets wasn't stable at high speeds and quick turns. So if I may say, active driving was dangerous in this car.
Ну здесь, да, внутри чуть погромче, чем снаружи.
Ну да, ну шумку, многие делают шумку, я не делаю, потому что, как бы, ну блин, аутентично звук мотора.
Но туда одеяло какие-то люди в советское время складывали, да?
Да, там можно проложить, на самом деле, сзади. Ну вот уже почти 60 на 3, четвертая.
Ну нет, очень бодро.
Ну как бы разгоняется, да, но у меня мотор живой, там везде компрессия хорошая.
Он живой.
Подвеска у меня перебрана, практически люфтов нет, я еду.
Она мягкая, кстати, да.
Вот эта машина куплена в Воронеже была в 2004 году у единственного хозяина, ну как там, внук продавал, дедушка умер, был единственный хозяин, внук продавал, и вот она 2 раза своим ходом ездила в Сочи. Правда, из Воронежа там ближе, но
ну, там,
тем
да.
не менее, как бы, то есть они ездили, он мне рассказывал, что они с дедом ездили на юг.
Many people actually traveled a lot in these cars for great distances. For many of our grandpas, this was the first car in their life. Despite all its flaws and imperfections and a lot of mocking from people, I actually love this car. And I believe that after all these years, many people share very warm feelings about Gorbaty Zaporozets. Not a lot of cars survived since 1960s, but those that did are now carefully preserved and restored. And I wish that we keep all these cars alive and running. If you enjoyed this story about Gorbaty Zaporozets, you can comment about what car you want to hear about next.